So thank you so much, everyone, for coming to this WISH event on leadership through a pandemic and beyond. I'm Isabel Berry, chair of the WISH East board, and it's WISH East who are hosting this event today. So really pleased to see so many people and lots of people from the East region as well attending. It's great. So I have the real pleasure of bringing in Vicky Havison from Greenacre to be our host for today. So Vicky is principal consultant at Greenacre Consult, where she helps to grow and develop leaders and teams in the housing sector. She is passionate about taking a strengths-based approach to helping individuals develop and build on their skills and behaviours, and in creating workplaces where people feel included and able to be their best. Vicky has worked with clients across the Middle East, where she lived for 9 years, the UK, Asia, and the US. She is an advanced certified coach, certified strength coach, and psychological safety trainer. And I know I've had the privilege of being in events and meetings that Vicky has hosted and have seen how brilliant she is. So really pleased that she's doing this event for us today. So thank you very much, Vicky. So I'm going to go off camera and mute myself now. I'm just going to come back occasionally to bring in the comments from the chat bar. So yeah, like I say, please do really engage with the event. All the best, Vicky, Steph, and Shabana.
Thank you very much, Isabel. Thanks very much for the introduction there. And thank you to WISH for inviting me to facilitate today, and to our two speakers who I'll introduce in a moment. So I think it's worth just putting some context behind what we're here to talk about today, because I don't think anybody, at the beginning of 2020, had any idea about the amount of change that was ahead of us. And I think now, even as we move into autumn, where was the summer, in fact, and the latter part of 2021, we're still in what is a fairly uncertain future. So we wanted to take the opportunity to come together today to network and think about how we can support and learn from each other's experiences. So we're going to do that in two parts this afternoon. So Isabel, if you wouldn't mind just sharing your screen there for a moment, and I'll just talk you through what we're going to cover this afternoon. So the first is going to be a facilitated panel discussion with two leaders in the region, where we're going to explore what it means to be a leader right now and how expectations have changed about what it means to be a leader, and what some of the new skills and behaviours are that we need as we move forward into the future. And then we're going to break out into an activity. So we're going to present some questions for you to talk to each other about. So we'll be doing that in groups of around 3 or 4, give you around 20 minutes to do that, and then come back in and give some feedback. And we'll be using the chat function, as Isabel mentioned, to do that this afternoon. Now, when we do the panel discussion as well, we'd really love to hear any thoughts, any questions that you've got by dropping that into the chat. We're going to be keeping an eye on that and taking some breaks throughout that panel discussion just to reflect on that and to pose your questions to our two speakers that we have with us this afternoon. So thanks very much, Isabel. If you could take the screen off now. So I'd just like to introduce then our two speakers this afternoon. So really delighted to introduce you to Shabana Yusuf. So Shabana's Head of Compliance and Estates at Eastlight Community Homes, and she supported Eastlight through a recent merger which has taken place in the pandemic. She's worked in housing for over 25 years and is really passionate about making a difference through cultural and behaviour change. She's also a board member for Poplar Harker, a CIH London regional group member, and a mentor for the Housing Diversity Network. So welcome, Shabana, and thank you very much for joining us this afternoon. And then we've also got Stephanie Davis with us this afternoon. Stephanie's Head of Housing at Broadland Housing in Norfolk and a chartered member of the CIH. Steph has a really strong passion for the housing sector and is really keen to encourage others to pursue a career in social housing, and for people to experience how brilliant the sector is and the various different roles that it can also offer. So Steph really believes much more can be done to recognise and promote the value of women in the sector, and that women can do much more to support each other so that we can be true to ourselves when we're in the workplace. So as I mentioned in a moment, we're going to move to our questions as part of the panel discussion. So just a reminder to please use that chat function as we move through those questions. So I'm going to then start and pose the first question to our two speakers this morning. So I'd love to know what you've learned about yourself and what you've learned about your leadership over the last 18 months. And Steph, if I might start with you there, please.
Yeah, so I think for me personally, I've realised I'm a bit more adaptable than I thought I was. I think we all have, the ability to adapt and kind of, change is challenging. And I guess I was kind of quite pleased that I found adapting not that difficult. I realised I'll never be a teacher, and I'm happy about that. And I guess I realised that it was really important to me to continue to work on my self-development as well. So I undertook a leadership course, which started just as the pandemic started. It wasn't planned to be that way. Obviously, it was planned to be a much different course, but I'd committed to undertaking a course, and I carried on doing that through the whole year of the pandemic. And I think that for me, that was really, really important, because I think it would have been really easy for kind of self-development to drop off during that year. So it was good to keep me focused. And I guess about myself, the other thing is that I realized just how important it is to continue to do things like this. So this isn't my natural comfort zone. And maybe if we were in person, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable. But I just, in terms of pushing yourself outside your comfort zone and recognizing, so, it was like, oh, can I do this? Because what have I got to, offer that anyone else can't? And I think it's just about acknowledging that it's really important to do these things, it's easy to get stuck and say, I don't have time, but to kind of push yourself and make time for these kinds of things, and just recognizing really what you get from others during these calls. I know there'll be a lot of talking by ourselves, but actually it's what you get from other people. So I think those are things that I recognized about myself. Do you want to know generally, or do you want to come on to that, around general leadership?
Well, I was really curious about what you mentioned there about making the time.
Yeah.
Because I think it's something we can all relate to, isn't it? Is how do we find the time to do these things, and where do you get it from? So I'd be curious to know how you've managed to do that.
I'm not going to say that it was easy. I'm not going to say I've got the balance right, because I don't think for 1 minute I have, but I think there were certain things. So like trying to make, if it was 10-15 minutes before I started my day, which, seemed quite repetitive during the pandemic, and still is in ways, when you're kind of working from home or in the same position every day. So I think it was about trying to give myself time to think before I did start work. That was much easier when the sun was out and I could go into a garden, because I have that resource, and be able to just sit and think. But I think for me, I think that's something that kind of later on I want to come to, is I think that's a challenge for anyone, in terms of leadership, is how you make that time and how you encourage other people to make that time. So yeah, I managed to do some of it, but I think that I think making more time and how that becomes our day to day, instead of having to make it be an effort, for me is something that I'm really keen to know more about.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steph, for sharing that. And what has that led you to learn about your leadership?
I think it's important about, how reflection time is important. Just generally how important communication and vision is, and especially during periods of uncertainty. And I think for me, I had this realization that people, everyone was still doing the same job, but actually something changed, and people who had been doing that job, like myself, had been doing my job. I suddenly wasn't sure what's expected of me, and I suddenly wasn't sure, am I doing what I need to be doing at this time? And I think it felt like, I've said this in something else that a blog I wrote, is it felt like everyone became a new starter all of a sudden, and everyone had to learn how to do things differently, and I think that was really, really important. So I think that kind of communication and vision, and making sure that you're getting the right messages out, and that you're listening, all of that stuff, I think unfortunately you can't do that unless you make time to think and to listen. And I think making time, it connects with everything. And I think that's what I've learned, really, is that throughout you need to make time for all of these different things. So yeah, it's how we become really good role models at it. For me, I'd really like to get better at.
Fantastic, thank you, Steph. So really hearing that importance of making that time to think. Shabana, how about you? Same question. What have you learned about yourself and your leadership over the last 18 months?
It's been an interesting 18 months, hasn't it? It's been a rough, tough year. So I think what I've learned is, like this morning, be prepared for anything. Because I had a phone call just before 11:30 saying your little one's forgotten his packed lunch. So it was like dash off to summer school, drop it off, and hence I was late for this. So I think just be prepared. Last 18 months have been challenging for all of us, and I think particularly whether you've got children or no children, I think you probably all had some kind of challenge along the way. So I think for me personally, it's been kind of finding the bits that have been hidden within me that I wasn't aware of. So I think, I've always been quite resilient, but I didn't know how resilient I was. So I think I found that coming out a lot more. It was interesting that I had to adapt quickly. So where I'm a natural planner and I like to plan things and do a lot of horizon scanning and look ahead, and in terms of mitigating risks and that kind of stuff. Some of that just wasn't possible. It was kind of, it was kind of spontaneous. You had to think more quickly on your feet. So I had to develop that attribute a bit more, and become more versatile and agile in my thinking. So yeah, I've had to kind of, work differently. I'm not a natural worker from home. I'm not, I prefer to be in the office. I like the social part of the office. And actually to be at home by myself all day, apart from when the kids were at home for homeschooling, which was another challenge that we can talk about. I think, it's had its testing times, but, I think it's been a real sort of positive learning for me, I think. It's part of my own kind of learning and development in terms of what I can achieve. And I think the kind of things that I got involved in to keep me going were like, I stuck with leadership coaching. So I sort of had some leadership coaching to kind of, see the positives of life and what I was doing and where I was heading. So that was quite useful for me. That was great. I kept involved in the board role that I was doing, and that kept me kind of, going and focused. Did some mentoring over the year and a half as well for a young lady at Optivo. So yeah, kind of kept my sort of hand in sort of various things just to kind of keep it live and not just kind of get lost in the pandemic world as such.
Fantastic, thank you. So actually hearing to be prepared for anything, and I think we've all, haven't we, had to juggle in different ways and have different things that we've had to juggle there and respond to. And it sounds like you've really realised how resilient you can be given the situation and everything you've had to deal with. So thank you for sharing that. Steph, coming back to something you mentioned, which is around expectations, how do you think the pandemic and everything that's happened has changed what's expected of leaders now?
I mean, I was thinking about this, and I was actually, you can get slipped into that kind of, thinking about all the skills and everything like that. I mean, for me, because I don't see leadership as a status of where you are in an organization. It is around behaviors and things. So for me, I was thinking actually, it's not really about what they need to, what they, the expectation of change, but actually how leaders do it, and how how it's different is what's changed. So for me, it's all of these things that leaders are very good at, and are still there. It's how do those things now adapt? So having a good insight into people and interest into people, it's always been a quality you need, but how do you do that when you've got an agile workforce, and how do you do that when you've got new starters that you don't know? And it was things about like sharing the vision and communication as a leader. Those things sometimes were easier in the office. So how do you now, with people having overloads of Teams messages and emails, and how do you make sure that those things are not just kind of seen, but how are they understood? How do you know staff are bought into those? And how do you create space for people to think? So that's really important. Staff are working from home. My kitchen is not a creative atmosphere at all. I'm surrounded by washing up and clothes most of the time. And, for me, that's not a creative space, but for the moment, for the longer term, this is my workspace. So, how do I have that space to be creative? And obviously, that will be across different organizations. So some people, will open up all of their offices, and some people won't, and some people will have a mixture. There are all these different things. So for me, it's about, I don't personally think the fundamentals of leadership have changed, but I think how you go about them and how you implement them are a huge challenge. So for me, that's going to be kind of the most interesting thing, particularly as time goes on.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. And what do you think are, say, 3 must-have behaviours which you talked about there that leaders need to have?
I think approachability for me is really important, and I think that's become more difficult. In terms of how you can be approachable with workforces, in different ways. For me, kind of open and honesty is a massive one, and that's knowing, being honest about how we feel, and understanding kind of what people are going through. And I think trust. So trust that your staff. So you've got trust in teams and in staff that they're doing what they need to do, and they're looking out for their own well-being and work-life balance. But trust also that they feel that they can come and talk to people when they need to, and get what they need from leaders and managers in organizations. And I guess trust that people are trusting in themselves as leaders and as staff. So for me, trust is a big one. So they'd kind of probably be my key ones right now.
Thank you. So approachability, openness and honesty, and trust.
Yeah.
Thanks, Steph. Shabana, how have some of the expectations changed for you in your role as a leader?
Yeah, I think for me, it's very similar to what Steph has said, really. I think it kind of overarches slightly, but in terms of sort of the organisation that I'm working at, as you said, they merged in the pandemic. I mean, that's no small feat. That's, that was a big task, and to do it so well as well. So I think just working at Eastlight and kind of looking at what we've had to do, I would say for me, particularly, it's been kind of fostering that kind of those good relationships, trying to build on those through trust. So we've all been working remotely. It's really hard. It's really hard to build relationships through the lens, isn't it? And when you're looking through the lens, you're trying to gauge each other, and you don't always get that really quickly when you see somebody face to face over a coffee. So I think there's been those kind of challenges that have been kind of obvious to everybody, I think. But then I think also kind of getting that real balance of, I guess, sort of supporting people that are going through a tough time through kind of the challenges of being at home or with the family or work, and striking that balance of well-being. So that's been kind of huge for me, because we've had a number of people in the business, and I think, and I say this quite genuinely, that I think it's across the piece. I don't think it's Eastlight. I do generally believe, because I speak to people in all sorts of organisations in G20s, and I think it seems to be really sort of widespread, where people have been affected by being at home. So I think that's been quite interesting for me. And what I've kind of done is I've really branched out quite quickly to support people, working with them on that foundation of trust and building those relationships. But yeah, that has been the tricky bit, I think.
So providing people with that support that they need, and well-being, of course, is something that I'd really like to come on to as part of the second part of our discussion around that too. And what have you noticed in terms of some of the must-have behaviours that you need to be demonstrating as a leader?
Yeah, I think it's so critical now to be, sort of authentic. I think people are looking for that in leaders. They're looking for the openness, to trust, the authenticity, because I think people are they've been away from the office, they've been sort of isolated, and they've been detached. And actually, as we're moving back into that arena slowly, I think people are now kind of forming those relationships. But I generally think authenticity is really essential. Communication is a must. and getting that right, you know, for your audience, you know, from sort of not just your customers, but your internal partners and your external. So really having that kind of clear communication. And I think one of the most important things to me, and I say this quite a lot, is just the emotional intelligence. I think it's critical to have that and really utilize that as kind of your sixth sense. You're working with people all the time who, trying their best to deliver a service. And I think if somebody's kind of not sort of delivering to the expected level, kind of work with them, use your emotional intelligence to bring the best out of them. I think you can really kind of use that attribute to turn something around that's negative into positive. And I'm a firm believer in that. So I think emotional intelligence, authenticity and communication for me, Vicky.
Thanks very much, Shabana. I'm going to just take a pause there, Isabel, if I may, and just ask you what you're seeing coming through the chat there.
We've just had one question at the moment, so I really encourage anyone, if you've got a question in your head right now, please pop it in the chat, but we can go. So Hannah Harvey has asked how you've managed to avoid burnout. And I think as well, listening to you, Shabana, when you were talking about all the very many different things you've been doing as well, that sounded like a lot to juggle. Steph, I'm sure you felt similar at points. Was there any, like you said, that sort of helped you feel connected to the world and not just in that pandemic bubble, but equally did you feel at times there were some things you felt you needed to say, actually, I need a boundary, I need to stop doing something, I can't do all the things?
Oh gosh, yes, 100%. I think in all fairness, Hannah, I think that's a great question. And I think most of us probably did hit that line of burnout in some shape or form, because we were kind of going 100 miles per hour. And you kind of, with me, I'm very conscientious about work. I'm very loyal to my employer. I'm also equally kind of really committed to my children. So I was always consciously fighting to get that balance right. So, I was doing the best work and doing the best in the family. And I think just, when you're working from home, I think we've all probably found it, haven't we? We're probably working slightly longer hours because we don't have that travel time to work, where you're listening to the radio in the car and all that kind of stuff. That's all kind of removed. So you kind of get up and your laptop's there. You just walk from one room to the other. And that's kind of your journey, isn't it? So I think, when you take away all of that and you kind of think, actually, I'm spending more time. So yeah, I did. I got to the point, in all fairness, that I thought I just need a break. And I've got a really good relationship with my manager. She's absolutely brilliant. If anybody knows Charlotte Todd, she's amazing. And Charlotte and I had a great chat and said, look, I think I just need a week's holiday just to recharge my batteries. And I think the signals, guys. I mean, if you're getting to that point where you feel I'm getting tired, I'm losing focus, I'm losing interest, or it's kind of just it feels like it's a bit much. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid to sort of say, hey, look, I think I just need a few days off. I need a long weekend, a week off, and use it, because you've got to put yourself first. You've got to kind of look after yourself if you're going to then look after everything else that's going on around you, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've got, thanks for that answer, Shabana. So we've got an observation in the chat bar that I'll just read out. So Kate Forrester has put that she agrees with the expectation of leaders. There's more expected from us now, and people expect foresight and to us to know the government's next move, which can be challenging. But people managing people's expectations, keeping in touch, encouraging people to talk and share keeps all of us more on track, which, I think that feels like it's very in tune with what the two of you have been saying as well. And I think, I can remember back to when it felt like everything changed every day and you were just fighting to just have any sense of what today's version of the world was, and that was really challenging. And then Liz Oliver is asking, how do you think the next 6 to 12 months will change our workforce, and how can we try and implement new methods of support? So Steph, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, I mean, that's actually a question that I think there's a question we talk about later on, and I was keen to know from the audience. So from my point of view, I think we've tried lots of things. I think there's a lot of stuff that's been tried throughout organizations, mental health champions, drop-in chats, all of the stuff that everyone's tried to do around that. And I think to a degree that was probably a little bit easier when the majority of people were working from home. Not everyone, I appreciate, but a large amount of people. And I think for me, that's the thing. You now have these different situations. So you've got hybrid working, mixture of the two. You've got people who are going to be working from home. You've got people who are going back into the offices. And for me, that's kind of the biggest challenge, particularly, you know, as the nights draw in and winter comes, and, you know, things change for people, and just as time goes on. So I was kind of, you know, going to kind of question dodge that. That's one of the points of coming along to see is, what do other people think about that? Because I think that's a massive challenge. I think as time goes on, it becomes harder with no crystal ball. So I think, you know, in terms of what we've done today, I think it's probably really standard around what other people have done. And I've seen so much similarity across the sector. Some really good stuff, you know, but lots of consistency around health and well-being. And so I'm intrigued to know what others in the audience really think about that, if I'm honest.
Okay, brilliant. So hopefully some of that will come out in the breakout. Yeah. But also, if people do have some thoughts they want to pop into the chat bar, please do. Then Alma's just put, which I think it relates slightly to your last answer, Shabana, about you know, saying it's okay for me to have, you know, to have a few days off, that sort of thing. But it's about role modelling the sort of work-life balance. So she's put, you both mentioned the importance of work-life balance, making time for yourself. How important is it to model that behaviour so staff know it's okay for them to do the same? So have you got anything you'd want to add on to that one?
Yeah, 100%. I think I do model it, and I've got 3 children. I've got an 11-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 6-year-old. So, you know, I'm really self-aware of my own situation, and I manage it well. And I think I'm also really sort of conscious about colleagues in the team and across the business, also that either have young children or they've got responsibilities of parents on them, or etc. etc. So I think, you know, I've taken the view that if I model it, then people will be more comfortable. So my calendar is blocked out for things like, you know, school pickup or summer club pickup at 3:30 every day. And actually, one of my members of staff said to me, you know, by you putting that in there, Shabana, it's made me more comfortable that I can do that. You know, and we're fortunate to have Emma as our chief exec, Emma Palmer, who is a fantastic role model, who's a mum herself, and, you know, firmly believes in agile working and flexibility. So I think that kind of distills down from her really to the leadership team, and we then feel confident that we can do that. So I guess every organisation is different, but I would say that yes, 100% do, you know, do feel confident enough to ask your manager and have those chats if you need to, if you need flexibility, because I think, you know, sometimes, you know, people are so busy, it's so fast paced, and they may not be aware of your situation. They may, you know, it just might be, there might be so much going on in your business that it just hasn't hit them, you know, in terms of recognizing your needs. So yeah, do have those conversations, feel comfortable having those chats, and you know, sort of, because it is important, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So there's also a question that's come in from Karen Pettican about resilience, which you mentioned, I think, Steph. Well, I think that you both used that word, but ensuring that your own resilience and well-being remains a focus so you can support your teams. Have you got any specific reflections, Steph, on resilience that you think would be useful to bring out?
Well, I mean, for me, it kind of relates to the other discussions as well. So I since the pandemic, maybe just before, but I've really got into like gardening. So which I just never thought. I mean, a weed was a plant to me previously. You know, they were the same thing. And I've got into gardening, and I think, you know, in terms of kind of, you know, resilience and needing to kind of have that time for yourself, is that, you know, I will water, if I water my plants in my lunch break, that makes me stop. Or if I go and, you know, put nuts in the bird feeder, which brings me great joy. I mean, that those kind of things make me happy whilst I'm working, and that's my view now. And it's things like that make me really happy. Watching the birds makes me really, really happy, and actually that means I'm happy in my work, and I'm happy in my work means I'm more resilient to the tasks that I've got to do and the things ahead. So for me, I was like, oh, this is new, because I mean, before our main office didn't have any windows really due to the setup of it. So for me, there are things like that which are really small, and they probably sound really silly. Actually, they probably do. But you know, just you know, seeing a plant grow overnight when I come down the next morning, and those things that really are in tune with me and make me happy, make me better at work. And yeah, so I think there are things like that naturally did. and I guess around the resilience is just around the kind of being honest as well, kind of about how you're feeling and where you are. And I guess that's quite important as well. Coming back to the agile thing, you know, we were agile before the pandemic, so we you know, so in terms of the work-life balance, that's quite difficult, because actually if you're someone who, you know, wants to take an hour off to do something with your family and then work an hour that evening, that's the principle that we've always worked to. But during the pandemic, it was really interesting that it was, you know, it was about that, but not about placing the added expectation on people doing what's a really even more difficult time. So we've like put on our messages, and our culture now is that if I send a message to you and it's outside of our working hours, I don't expect a response. Because actually for me, even though the pandemic's here, that's been really helpful to me. So I could go and see my son on sports day and take 2 hours off and then work in the evening. That's how I work, but just knowing I don't put that pressure on others. And being saying to people, you know, about that. So just a couple of things there. But I think, yeah, I don't think it's easy. I don't think it's easy to be resilient, particularly when you're faced with challenges like we've had and unknowns.
Yeah, but that's really nice little practical tip, that one about the email. So yeah, thanks, Steph. So there's a question from Jacqueline Adusi about sickness levels and what they've been like for your organisations during the pandemic, how that's been managed without burdening other staff, the colleagues that are still in the business. And Siobhan, do you have any thoughts on that from Eastlight?
Yeah, sure. So I think sickness has kind of been all around, really, hasn't it? In terms of how people are feeling, you know, particularly with sort of COVID and etc. But just in terms of well-being as well and mental health. So I think that's kind of a broad kind of area. But in terms of the impact that it may have had, like most organisations, you know, we've had to adapt really, really quickly as well to support people. Brought in mindfulness sessions, mental health sessions, offered lots of stuff around Bupa, an employee assistance program, and the offerings that the organisation has. So we've kind of done that, and also we've had people available in the business as mental health first aiders, where you can have a chat. I think just from a personal point of view, what I've done is the tips that I've used is that I've kind of really worked with people to look at the signs where I can see people are kind of dipping, or I can see they're just not having a good day on the screen, is to pick up the phone afterwards and call them straight away to say, you know, are you okay? You didn't see yourself this morning, you know, and just kind of reach out, and then arrange those virtual coffees, you know, just kind of have that quiet time with them. So it's not all about work, because I think work is really, really important. I mean, particularly in my part of the world, which is compliance. Heavens, you know, we would never want that to slip. But, you know, you've got to be sensible. You've got to get that balance with your colleagues. And I think, you know, it's really, really important. It's kind of people first for me. You know, they're the biggest asset that we have as a company. And I think you've got to make sure that they're in the right place to deliver, because if somebody's not in the right place, then they won't. In terms of numbers, I don't think they were huge. I think, you know, they were small numbers, like most organisations. So there wasn't a huge impact. But yeah, I think the organisation was particularly good at kind of working with people and in terms of supporting them, which was brilliant, really.
So we've had one question come in anonymously, which someone's asking for your advice around dealing with a legacy issue that's impacted them. So we have an issue in our team with mistrust and feeling underappreciated that goes back to a previous manager. How can I help our staff to feel trusted and appreciated, and also help them to trust me as a manager when they've been let down in the past? So not necessarily completely pandemic related, but with that theme of leading from a distance, and the team that are remote. So have you got any thoughts to that might help somebody in that situation? Steph, have you got any thoughts that come to mind?
I mean, I had a similar situation with a team that are remote, and you know, spread throughout the county, really. I think it's really, for me, in that situation, and of course everyone's different, for me it was about it was a team who did really, really great work, but had lost the kind of vision and the purpose of themselves, and some of that was, I think, through, you know, could have been better through leadership, and just the phenomenal impact that they made, And sometimes just realizing, I think it's difficult for some teams. This particular team weren't, I don't think, overly confident in how they slotted into the business, just because of the kind of work that they did. And upon talking to them, it was really about establishing that purpose, them recognizing how good the work was they did, trying to understand what's not been done, you know, things that have been promised that haven't been promised, action plans, some really quick wins, highlighting them as a team throughout the organization, and the work they do, and then strong management and leadership coaching to take them the rest of the way. So I did have that experience with the team. I don't know if that helps, but it was also a team that were quite hard to engage with as well, and seen as quite hard to engage with. So that's what I did there, if that's any help.
Yeah, thanks, Steph. So we've had a few more comments. If I read them out and then pass back to you, Vicky, to sort of finish up, complete the panel discussion. So there's a few different things here. One, we've got an observation from Susanna on the sickness one about sickness being quite low in the pandemic, but actually in the last month seeing the days lost double and having a big increase in the number of requests for counselling coming through now, which is really interesting about people's continued resilience as we, you know, look ahead to hybrid. So another observation about emails, where someone's saying that one tactic that they've used is to use the delayed send. So they might have written the email in the evening, but it doesn't send until normal office hours, so that people don't feel that pressure. So just a different strategy to managing that. And then a question about dealing with coming back to the office with some colleagues who are anxious about those who have not chosen to be vaccinated yet, and how organisations are going to manage that. And sort of not linked to that, other people who are feeling nervous or resistant to coming back into the office, whether that's 1 or 2 days a week or at all, that because they've got sort of childcare arrangements now that work based on them working from home and not really wanting to change that. But the question sort of stating that the business needs are that staff are back in the office sort of 1 or 2 days a week. So I think that links to what you were saying, Steph, about how do we manage this challenge around hybrid working. And yeah, so I think, Vicky, if I hand back to you then, do you want to take us to round up our panel discussion with Steph and Shivana?
Thanks very much, Isabel. I'd be really curious to know, just in terms of personally, we've talked quite a bit about well-being and what you've done to support other people's well-being, what you've done to role model your own. What's a tool or resource that's been particularly helpful to you that you keep coming back to and using time and time again? And I'd just be interested to know what that might be, which we could share with other members here today. Shivana, coming to you first, is there a tool or resource that you found particularly helpful?
I think what I've kind of stuck with really, and what's worked for me, is just the authenticity. I think we talked about, you know, being able to kind of just be yourself, you know, and I think whether it's a pandemic or not a pandemic, I think we all have good days and bad days, you know, and the pandemic's obviously that, you know, that the impact of that has just made it 10 times worse. But I think, you know, yourself, you know, your strengths, you know, your blind spots. I think, you know, there is no imposter syndrome here. You are yourself. You just do the best that you can do. And I think as long as you kind of reflect those values and those behaviours, you know, in terms of your leadership, and you know, put your hands up when you get it wrong. You know, say I've got it wrong, because you know people can see that, and they'll see that that's okay. It's all right to get things wrong. So I think, you know, the authenticity, I think, is really, really important, because that will then lead on to several other things like trust, or branch out. You build up trust, you build up better relationships, you know, and all those key things that you need to foster good relationships. You know, develop a better culture where you've got the opportunity to kind of allow people's voices to be heard. You know, you kind of have them more engaged, I think, in those conversations.
Thanks, Shivana. And interested to know, you talked about strengths and blind spots and knowing those in order to be authentic. How have you understood your strengths and blind spots for yourself?
Yeah, I think for me, I talked about the coaching earlier, the leadership coaching that I had with somebody, and that actually helped me navigate some of those tricky bits that I've talked about. So, some of my blind spots or weaknesses, or areas for improvement, whatever you call it, whatever the correct terminology is for anybody. That's helped me to recognize what those areas are and actually hone in on those. And actually just kind of get some really sort of clear feedback from somebody who's quite neutral in a safe space when you're coaching. There is no kind of there's no kind of sort of historic relationship there with that person, so it's not a member of my family, or it's not a line manager. It's somebody completely neutral territory who can kind of just give you that honest feedback in terms of what they think is going on. And it's I definitely recommend it. I definitely recommend coaching to anybody that hasn't had it. Do consider it.
Thanks very much for sharing that, Shabana. Steph, how about you? What's a tool or resource that you keep coming back to?
So there's been a couple for me. I mean, as I said, I did a leadership course, the Greenacre leadership course at the start of the pandemic, and that took place over a year, and that was full of tools and resources and books, Vicky, which, so that was really good actually, because the timing of having those sorts of things was really helpful. Particularly there was lots about leading through change and what's expected of leaders. So it was really helpful. I think for me, I did a personality profile tool called Facet 5. Which I hadn't done before. So I didn't know of Facet 5. I'd done Discovery and other types of profiles. And that came back and kind of told me I was an introvert, which was a huge shock. But told me why I display kind of extrovert behaviors. So for me, actually working from home, I was like, oh, I'm an introvert. And actually that's maybe why I'm really comfortable working from home. It allowed me to think about myself. But it also taught me about my kind of weak spots and things to look out for. And I think I definitely really benefited from having those visible to me when I was working from home. So some of my weak spots are things that, if I do that, so if I get overloaded or don't plan enough, and those weaker spots, they will lead to problems with health and well-being and me feeling kind of well and resilient. So it was helpful to have that. And I guess the Simon Sinek, I know everyone talks about Simon Sinek, but the whole purpose and why, I think that's really important. And particularly when you're having very repetitive days, which, I felt like I am having and was having for a long period of time, was really coming back to purpose and why. And I think that really motivates me. And I think that just continuing to have that in my mind and ask those questions, why am I doing it? And think about purpose for me was really, really good.
Yeah, great stuff. Thanks for sharing that, Steph. And it's interesting, isn't it, around purpose? It's probably one of the most underutilized tools we have, which is explaining to people why it is we're asking them to do something, because actually people need to know and understand that why, and that can really help drive you, particularly during times of uncertainty. And just a final question from me before we just check in on the chat and move to that breakout activity. There's been sort of quite a lot of things that people have talked about around, what they've needed to change, of course, during the course of the pandemic and what they've had to perhaps lose. What have you gained through it that you want to make sure that you maintain going forwards? And Shabana, coming to you first on that one.
That's a tricky one, isn't it? That's a hard question, I think. What have I gained? Well, I think one of the things, just reflecting on your question, I think one of the things that I've probably realised is that resilience piece. I talked about it being tucked away, and I always thought I was fairly resilient, but didn't know how resilient. And I think that's probably come out more, I think, for me in terms of getting that kind of that pressure or being in the pandemic and going through sort of that journey. And that has definitely risen. That's definitely become more prominent for me, I think, and has helped. I think has really helped me.
So building that resilience is something you really want to hold on to now, moving forwards.
Yeah, thank you.
How about you, Steph?
So for me, it's really about the kind of external networking. So during the pandemic, I kind of lost my kind of love of social media. I mean, it wasn't massive, but I you know, made an effort. And I found that really difficult during the pandemic because I found screen time to screen time in any way. I didn't want that when I finished in front of the computer screen. I didn't kind of engage with social media that much, and I lost something from that in terms of external networking. But I did build some external networks through the course I was doing, and I think the key thing for me was that actually it's easier online. It's not the same, but it's easier. And just to not be complacent. So I work in Norfolk. It's quite a small place, and I've been in a job for a very long time, and I know quite a lot of people in the county. So, but I kind of realized that actually through doing the course and meeting new people, that I opened myself up to people who do very different jobs to me. You know, I'm starting to talk to people who work in finance, or people who work in transformation, people who I wouldn't naturally probably have networked with at a course on, you know, housing management or whatever your speciality was. And that's been really great for me. I've needed that. I've needed some external networking, and I've needed to be able to talk to people outside of my own organization. And I was surprised, I guess, that happened. And yeah, I want that to continue, and things like today, of course, it just really helps. So I really want to try hard to maintain that as I move forward.
Fantastic. Thanks, Steph. So that networking piece, and of course, being here today, we have an opportunity to do that, and it really does lead us nicely into the activity that we're going to do in a moment. Isabel, just before we pop that up and share that with everyone, I just want to check in on if there's anything else burning in that chat there.
Yeah, so we have had a couple of questions from Sue Shirt, who's so slightly different, but I'll read them both out, and then Shabana and Steph, you can take the elements you want to talk about. So has anyone managed a major service redesign and change over the last 12 months? And Shabana, you talked about the merger already and the change that that's brought. How did you change your style to deliver this? So a question getting at style. And then also leadership is ultimately about service delivery through people for customers. Customers are anxious, and we're an incredibly divided nation. How is this impacting on the way you lead your teams? So Shabana, do you have any thoughts to those questions?
Yeah, I think with the pandemic, I mean, I talked about Eastlight and the merger, and I think in terms of the kind of the service model, you'll find that always is kind of something that comes as part of a sort of a bigger transformation piece, a bigger strategy, you know, kind of from the board and from exec. So I think what I found was that I was working to deliver that with the existing team. So there were two teams. When those two teams came together in last July, it was interesting that, you know, there were challenges there that were quite, I think we knew what the challenges were, but actually it hits you when you're in that zone of those challenges. So things like very different processes, you know, different IT systems, you know, different regimes within teams. You know, there were those operational differences that we really had to work through and start thinking about how we were going to align that piece, and then look at things like the software amalgamation of those teams. So I think they were kind of the imminent challenges for us. I mean, it was incrementally harder, I think, in the beginning, and as we kind of got to about 6 months and everything had kind of aligned, things were a lot easier. But yeah, I think even now, if I'm looking at where we are now from that journey a year on, there's still lots of little bits that we've got to do. We're still working on an estate services piece, because that was quite a large piece to review, and what we didn't want to do was just rush it and get it wrong. We really wanted to review it fairly for our customers. And I read on the screen earlier that somebody talked about the, you know, ultimately the service is there for the customers. You know, I'm a firm believer of that. I think I'm quite customer centric myself, and I think it is, you know, we're there for the customers. And so there's that bigger, broader piece that I kind of pushed to the end, because I thought actually that requires quite a large investment of time, and all the contractual stuff that we could align quite nicely and easily was kind of done first. But bringing the people together was another challenge for me, because I think both organisations had very different setups, very different cultures. So it was kind of really building up the Eastlight way in terms of the culture and what we were hoping to achieve, and working with people to kind of understand that and deliver that. So there was a transformational piece there. I think we're still going through that transformational piece, if I'm honest with you.
Isabel, you're on mute.
Oh,
Sorry,
you're back.
Conscious of time. Steph, did you have any last comment on those before we go to the breakouts then?
No, I think on the customer one, in terms of, you know, how that's influenced, you know, customers have obviously gone through uncertainty, as we all have. You know, all people have gone through uncertainty. And I just think it you know, in terms of organizations, everyone would have had their own approach. But I mean, you know, good clear communication with customers about where you are and what you're doing, you know, video messages we had from our chief exec and things like that to engage customers and talk about the impact of the pandemic and, you know, how we restart repairs and engaging with them and all of that, alongside the support. So knowing if any kind of customer needed anything from you, that they could engage with you, and, you know, we would find a way of helping, which is, you know, kind of a, you know, was a real builder for staff, actually, getting people to work together to, you know, deliver, you know, medication or food, whatever people needed. I think that brought real team spirit. But I think it was just recognizing as well that there's a common message there, you know, for tenants and customers, is that, you know, if you need our help, tell us. And I think that resonates with me in terms of my workforce. If you need help, tell us. And I think that's it. It's just telling people to talk about it and you know, what is it you need, and then, you know, we find a way of responding, whether that's to customers, staff, you know, contractors, partners, and that's part of, I think, you know, some of the positives of this journey around how people have reacted and supported each other and listened. And, you know, I think it's important just to remember that there has been positives through a really, really difficult time as well.
Brilliant, thanks. Shall I share the slide then, Vicky?
Please, Isabel. And firstly, just want to say a massive thank you, Steph and Shabana, for having the conversation with us this afternoon. So it's been an absolute pleasure to talk to you. So there's an opportunity now to go into some breakout rooms, which Isabel is going to organise in just a moment. So it's a conversation between you, say hello, and just talk about what's been going on for you, what's going on in your world right now. What have you been learning about yourself and your own leadership since the pandemic? What's been an adjustment and the biggest adjustment you've had to make? And any tools and resources or practices that have also been really helpful to you, would be great to share that. So we'll be doing that in around kind of 15 to 20 minutes in breakout rooms. So Isabel will put you into breakout rooms in a moment. And I just want to say it's a confidential space. So it's an opportunity to listen, question each other and share what you really feel comfortable with doing. So when you come back, we'll be asking you to share some of those headlines from your conversation in the chat. So be prepared to come back and pop some of those into the chat box as well. So we'll put out a broadcast message once you're into the breakout rooms with these questions in. If anybody wants to take a quick photograph, here's your opportunity right now before you find yourself in a breakout room in a few moments' time. So it takes just a couple of moments to put you there and transport you. So we'll keep our fingers crossed that that will be a smooth transition. So just
okay. So we've just auto assigned, so we don't know who you're ending up with because we didn't know quite who was joining the session. So I'll do it now and let's hope for the best.
Okay, I can see everyone starting to come back in now. Hope that wasn't too brutal for you all. Yeah, those of you used to Teams, at least you get a 1-minute warning, hey, with Zoom. So just seeing people.
I was literally saying goodbye and then it just went bong. I was like, oh.
You did you get a 1-minute warning though, Laura? Did you see the 1-minute warning?
Talking too much.
Laura, I can't believe you were talking too much. That is slightly shocking.
Where did you come from, Hannah?
I've been sitting quietly in the background for a change. I didn't want to upset Steph with me asking her loads of millions of questions.
I was really disappointed. I thought you weren't here because you hadn't asked me millions of questions and put me on the spot and made me go, oh,
I was being kind.
You're lovely. Nice to see you.
It's nice to see people's faces actually coming back in from the breakout room. So welcome back, everyone. I think, is everyone back in now, Isabel? We have everyone back with a smaller breakout room.
I think we do. Yeah,
So I'm just going to ask for some reflection. So it'd be great to hear your thoughts into the chat box there, if you'd like to, or if anyone would like to share any reflections with the rest of the group here today, just in terms of what came out of some of the discussions and some of the themes from your actual breakout rooms.
Should I share something, Vicky?
Oh,
I know it will make Steph happy. So we were talking about actually being humans together in a space and how challenging that was going to be, because actually we've got so used to hiding behind a screen. That's been great because you can read people, you can eye contact, etc., etc. But when you're actually in a room together and you actually feed off people's energy, and I, for one, unsurprisingly, am someone that really thrives on that type of energy, and vice versa the other way, that's actually quite challenging because we've not done it for a while and it's quite tiring. And as we go back into this more hybrid way of working, how we manage to navigate that will be quite tricky, because there's going to be natural times when people are feeling nervous about coming back in, or actually do they want to come back in? Should I stay close? Do I actually give that person a hug? How do they feel about contact? And I think all of those things are just stuff for us to consider. So I think we were just talking about actually how it's going to be very strange for us all to be actual physical beings in a room learning to be with each other again, and how that will impact on how we work together, because we've not done it for so long. I think it was quite an interesting debate to and fro between us, and something that we're all looking forward to, but again something that we're all going to find quite challenging, I think, in the coming months, because we don't know how long it will last. Hopefully we're not going to have any more lockdowns, but I don't think we can rule it out either. So I think it's going to be a challenging year as we readapt to being together in spaces opposed to across a video screen.
Thanks, Hannah, for sharing that. It's a really interesting point, isn't it? Is how do we get back together in a space? And of course we've all got our own preferences, haven't we, in terms of the way in which we like to work. And how do we find that balance and understand what people's needs are still in what's going to remain, I think, an uncertain time as we move forward there. It was really interesting. I had to get on a train for the first time about 3 months ago, and I was really nervous about it. Yeah, it was something I used to do 2 or 3 times a week, every week, for such a long time. It's like I don't know how to navigate my way on a train anymore. And once I'd done it once, it was okay. So it is this sort of strange space, isn't it, in this transition. Thank you very much, Hannah, for sharing that. So Nick, thank you. You spoke about the transition from office to home as an adjustment and how we manage it. So some similarities there, and how organisations manage it. And then Kate, you shared that we talked about attendance, being open, keeping that communication is important, isn't it? It's always been important. And I think we saw an increase in communication in organisations at the beginning of the pandemic, and then it sort of flattened off a bit. And actually, it just remains as important now as it always has done, particularly as we go into that hybrid working and that different way of working for various people, and getting that balance right. And well-being, everywhere I go at the moment, it's a topic of conversation. It's so important to think about how we stay well, and as leaders, how we role model well-being, and how do we continue to support people when sometimes we just don't know, because we're trying to understand and support them, aren't we? And we're trying to do that in all different kinds of ways, because they're not in the office, some people at home, some people don't like to share how they're feeling. So how do we find out and find out whether they're okay or not? And Alma, thank you. You talked about how everyone's still struggling to adapt to the constant changes, and how important it is to take that time out and recalibrate. And I think it's a really interesting point that Shabana, you made earlier. And I'd just be really curious to know right now, how many people, put it as a show of hands, you can do the reactions bar at the bottom of your screen. How many people block time out in their calendar for things like thinking, for example? Some people do that, some people are putting their hands up. Some people aren't putting their hands up. It's such a key point you're saying there, Nick. Actually, we all have to think, don't we? Because we're human beings. It's how are we actually planning that time into our calendars and allowing that transition from one thing to the next, rather than a calendar that is just blocked from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, because your brain isn't enabled to have that transition from your time out from what you've been doing to moving on to the next thing. And so how can we be productive if we don't enable ourselves to have those transition periods? So it's incredibly important. Yeah, Nick, staff would laugh at me if I put thinking. Maybe another way to badge it up as something that you're working on that gives you that opportunity to do that. So some great reflections there in the chat. What I'd just really love to know, just before I pass back to Isabel to close out, and we just give a quick poll for your experience this afternoon. Please share in the chat what's been most useful for you here today. So please share in the chat what's been most useful for you here today. And I'll just read some of those out as they come through. So hearing others' views and experiences, listening, time to share experiences, hearing from others, feeling supported, space, so important that we talked about, hearing everyone's different experiences, how they're dealing with them. Because we're sometimes we don't realise that other people are going through these things too. So it can be really important to share that with each other, and understanding that your own experiences aren't unique and that others are having the same challenges can be really reassuring, can't it? Everyone's experiencing the same issues and hurdles, and it's really helpful to hear other people's views and opinions, and having that time to reflect on that and seeing that it's okay to talk about these things as well and say them out loud to each other. So thank you very much. Nick, you've just put a point in there. It'd be great to somehow continue the conversations. So I think that's something for us to talk away and really think about there, and a forum and a group where we can engage with others on these things. So thank you for sharing that, and we'll take that back as a point to think about there. So thank you very much for participating this afternoon. It's been really great. Thank you again to Shabana and Steph for being here today. We'd just like to do a very quick poll, which Isabel, I believe you're going to just launch
it. Yeah.
We've got a couple of questions in there.
Okay. Has that worked?
That's worked, just to give us some feedback on your experience. And Isabel, I'm just going to pass over to you then now.
Thanks, Vicky.
Close out this afternoon, in fact.
Yeah, we've tripped into this afternoon. Yeah, so if you would just take a minute to answer that two question poll, your responses will be really, really valued. Thank you. And then, yeah, it's really just to say thank you for coming. Thank you for people being honest and sharing so openly. Thank you, yeah, again to Steph and Shabana for their really honest answers in the panel discussion, and some of the sort of both sort of practical tips that came out of that, but also some of those reflections that give us things to take away and have a think about. It is, I think lots of people have said it, but this looking ahead now to what hybrid is going to be, it does present us with this, another challenge here, and actually how we as organisations are going to mature around hybrid working, giving people the space to be themselves and bring that human side to work still, and those competing demands that people have of people who are wanting to stay at home versus people who are seeking some of that office more than others, and just getting this right, it's going to take a bit of time. So it'll be really, really good to keep this conversation going. Thank you to everyone who's up for being part of something going forward. I think that'd be really exciting. So I think we'll leave it there. I think most people have answered, so I'll stop sharing the poll now. And thank you so much everybody for attending. Really, really pleased. And so Michelle's just put up a comment about how actually you can get to more events like this in a way because of the pandemic, and that we're not all having to potentially give up a whole day to get to a venue in Cambridge or something. And I think that's right, and it's definitely been one of the bonuses that I've seen. It's looking forward to some face-to-face, but also recognising the absolute advantages that come from being able to come onto events like this and meet and see lots of people. So thanks everybody, and we'll see you again soon, I'm sure.
Thanks.
Bye.